Okay. Once again, welcome. I'm Michelle Jolin, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Results for America. I want to thank you for joining today's Local Infrastructure Hub session about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, the BEAD program, and how you can submit a competitive application to expand broadband access in your community. First, I'm very pleased to welcome Courtney Dozier, Deputy Director of the BEAD program at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Courtney, thank you so much for being here with us today, and the Zoom is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm Courtney Dozier. I'm the Deputy Director for the BEAD program here at NTIA. Coming to you from Richmond, Virginia. So just really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I'm going to cruise through a slide deck, as we all do. I want to hit on a couple of big things. Number one, I want to make sure everybody is kind of fluent in the program high notes. I think many of you are very familiar with the program. Some of you may be coming up to speed on it. It's certainly a large dollar amount that your states are getting. And so I want to make sure that folks are pretty fluent in the program, and then really specifically understand how our local governments can play in the challenge process and kind of the role and the importance of you all in that piece of it. So if we want to go to the next slide. Broad brush, right? You'll remember the Infrastructure Act. I'm going to cruise through this. You guys know this. $42 billion in broadband funding. It's a formulaic program, so your states were provided their allocation based on the number of and underserved locations in the state. Those numbers were rolled out back in June, which was a very exciting time for us. And so we will be working directly with your state broadband offices to administer the program. So unlike other federal programs, or like some other federal programs, in this case, the eligible entity is the state, and we'll be working with them to run a subgrantee selection process whereby they will kind of run a competitive and transparent and open process, select a bunch of subgrantees to ultimately go forward and connect the folks in your state. There's a lot of kind of goals and objectives for the program. The primary objective, y'all, is connecting everyone in your state to high-speed, reliable, affordable internet. That is the main metric by which we'll be measured, and is what we are pushing really hard on in our states. Many of you will kind of recognize that over the last several years, many of our states didn't even have a state broadband office. And so they were given, each of the states were given $5 million in planning funds over the last year, much of which is being used to increase their capacity, figuring out what it is that the state needs. They're putting together their 5-year action plan. Most of them have turned those in at this point, and they're starting to turn towards their initial proposal. All of their initial proposals are going to be due at the end of this year, and they'll kind of be off to the races and starting their challenge process, figuring out how they're going to connect everyone, and submitting their final proposal to NTIA by the end of 2024. It's kind of rolling, so it will depend on when your state submits their plans to us, but right, those dates are the max. So by the end of 2023, they have to submit their plan by December 27th. We wanted to have a date that was like really convenient to everyone's holiday plans. So by December 27th, they need to turn in their initial proposal to us. And then depending on, again, when they come in that process, by the end of 2024, we'll have or maybe beginning of 2025, their final proposal, and they'll be off to the races. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about this. Coverage to all unserved and underserved locations, right? So if there are, for the BEAD program, we break it into a couple different pieces and requirements. First and foremost, they have to use the money to connect all of their unserved locations. After that, it's their underserved locations. After that, we're really encouraging them to cover their eligible community anchor institutions, which can be a place here again that local leadership can have a really outsized voice in making sure that those community anchor institutions are identified. That that definition is pretty broad. So help us understand why a space or a building or an entity is a community anchor institution, how they're utilizing it to facilitate greater use of high-speed internet service by vulnerable populations. That is kind of the key phrasing for us. So states are being really thoughtful in that, and again, thinking about where folks in their community are coming together to utilize access to the internet. After community anchor institutions, we want them to think about non-deployment, potentially non-deployment activities. So they've connected everyone, they've connected their community anchor institutions. Now what, right? The non-deployment is a little bit of the so what, now what? How are we making sure that we're infusing digital equity with all of these build outs? How are we making sure that once they have access to the service, folks know what to do with it? And they'll have some monies, depending on the state, to effectuate some of those non-deployment activities as well. Next slide. So for local governments, there's a couple pieces. Number one, if you haven't already kind of connected with your state broadband office, would really encourage you to do that. Many of them are hosting, or the states have already stood up kind of a coalition of folks that are interested in this. Local governments are a huge piece of that. Making sure that you're surfacing who in your community has traditionally had a barrier to entry here, be it cost, be it language, be it other kind of accessibility needs. There's a huge component of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO for us, that talks about local coordination. And here, local coordination is really about how are we ensuring that we are addressing the needs of the community within our state. So we're asking folks to do a little bit more than like just a road show. How are they making sure that they're getting to those marginalized communities, that we have a real understanding of what it means to cross the finish line, not only in connecting everyone, but making sure that we're doing that in an equitable way and are getting resources to folks that need it. Again, on the affordability side, maybe it's a digital navigator program. There's all kinds of ways that we want to be working together here. So for you all, surfacing those communities and helping the state understand in your jurisdiction what some of those specific needs are is only going to make them better at implementing the program. You can apply to be a sub-grantee as part of the program. Again, on the deployment or the non-deployment side, the state will be the eligible entity. They will then run a competitive and transparent process to select programs by which to connecting everyone. So that could mean a private internet service provider. It could be a municipal service provider. It could be an electric co-op. It could be that your city has an amazing digital navigator program that you want to partner with the state on. So thinking about some of those opportunities to scale and be a sub-grantee if appropriate. And then finally, as I mentioned, connecting and collaborating with that office. They have a whole lot to do over the next 3 months. They have a whole lot to do in crafting their initial proposal. And in many ways, that is the starting line of our program, right? They have to kind of crash and put together what is a pretty significant document on how they're going to run this program, and then they get to go and run the program. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about where we are in the process. They're crafting these initial proposals. They've put together their 5-year action plan. I will say, by the way, and maybe we can link in the chat, one of the requirements of the BEAD program, different from some of the other programs, but BEAD does require a 30-day public comment period, not on the 5-year action plan, but on the initial proposal. So as they're posting these segments of the initial proposal, they are posting them online for 30-day comment periods. You all will know better about where to go find those. We are posting them on our website as we become aware of them, as we know about them, so that, and then in the chat, if you want to use that link to see where your state is. We're getting a lot of information kind of early in advance of that December 27th goal or deadline, I should say. But again, if you kind of think backwards, right, to include getting sign off maybe from the governor's office to include a 30-day public comment period, to include some pre-submission review by NTIA, to include some stakeholder engagement and feedback in their planning process. All of a sudden, December 27th, it doesn't look that far away. So they're in the throes of that right now, and wanted to make sure to mention that 30-day public comment period is important for us. We want to make sure that those plans are out there and available, and subject to review by certainly by you all, but and all of the different communities that we're trying to serve here. Oh, good question. I'm not totally keeping up with the questions in the chat, so hopefully someone will help me, but this one did pop up. The 30-day public comment period is for the initial proposal. So before we move off of that and into the challenge process, I'll clarify that. Yeah, thanks, Allison. So part of the first step after they have their initial proposal kind of into us, they can start running a challenge process. The challenge process is a recognition that we will learn best by the folks on the ground where places that still do not have access to affordable high-speed internet are. The FCC's map is the start of this process, right? There's been a recognition that the FCC had kind of a Herculean task here to document every single location in every single locality across the country that may or may not have service. They did a pretty good job, but we know it's not perfect. So the challenge process is kind of the next step for us soliciting feedback to where broadband serviceable locations remain. There are 3 entities that can submit challenges into the challenge process: internet service providers, local governments, and nonprofits. I did not say individuals. The process is not designed for individuals to submit challenges. We would expect them to work through their local governments, to work through nonprofits, again, that are trying to surface a lot of this feedback. But it's going to help ensure accurate results here. And I will say, when we think about the success of the program, having that challenge process be as inclusive as possible is a huge part of that, making sure that we are hearing from folks that are closest on the ground, that know where these locations are and where they are not, to ensure that what the state then is putting together when they say they're going to serve everyone is reflective of everyone. So if you think about the challenge process, it's taking the FCC's map and then adding some additional layers to it. We're also going to be adding on the NTIA side, we'll be working with states to kind of deduplicate and deconflict other binding federal commitments and or other state commitments, right? So if your state, or for example, the BIT program has at NTIA has already committed, or you've received a USDA grant and you're in the process of building it out there, that's going to be pulled off the map as an eligible location because we're not able to fund those twice. So getting the right map is kind of the what we're moving towards there in the challenge process. Let's do the next slide. NTIA will not run their challenge process. We've given them all kinds of TA materials, talked about what makes sense for them, but the state is going to be running their challenge process. NTIA's role is to validate that they ran the challenge process in the way that they said that they would. So there's a model challenge that states can avail themselves of that has even some choices within it, or states are kind of proposing their own mechanism. Again, as long as it fits within the rules of the program, the BEAD program is really designed to put states in the driver's seat as much as possible as the eligible entity. So we won't be kind of adjudicating the results of the challenge process at NTIA. We'll be working with them to ensure that they've run the program, run the challenge process in the way that they said that they would. A big piece of this is that states and territories are going to need to have some kind of portal to take this incoming. Many of them are working with consultants. Many of them are working with their local universities to kind of build a portal. We're encouraging them. This does not need to be like a very high speed intake process, but making sure they have a way of taking on feedback from the internet service providers, local governments, and nonprofits. So that is another way for you all to kind of be plugged in with the state. What does their portal look like? How can you be circulating that, or how can you be, again, kind of plugging in individuals to that as you hear about them? Next slide. So as a unit of local government, we would love for you all, as I said, you're kind of one of the three main eligible entities here to submit challenges. And thinking about who in your community still needs access. I feel like I'm repeating myself here on this slide, so maybe we'll keep going in the interest of time. Yep, next slide. Did we skip one? What happens after the challenge process? There we go. Thank you. So after the challenge process, the states will have 60 days where they will be putting together where their needs are in the state, right? There's a, again, you all know there are places already that have coverage. They've got access to the speeds. They've got access to high-speed affordable internet. So the crux of this program is to use that funding to fill in all of those gaps. And in running a subgrantee selection process and in funding those programs, not creating new gaps. So they're going to take their time in looking at the results of their challenge process and understanding where they have broadband serviceable locations to fill in their state. They'll then kind of put out for bid by subgrantees a list either of project areas, or every state's going to do it a little bit differently. Well, they'll be working to run a competitive process by which subgrantees will be selected to ultimately be awarded and go provide high-speed internet to these places. Again, I do want to note, we have it in here on red. What if I'm not a challenger? We have heard a lot from individuals that are disappointed that that's not individuals are not eligible to submit a challenge process. And so we are in all of our conversations with state-based coalitions, our meetings with local governments on the ground, reminding folks that we want individuals to be involved. We just need them to go through this process. Calls for them to go through either their local government or a nonprofit or the ISP directly if they want. So making sure that folks have access to knowing how to do that with your office would be really helpful. Figuring out how you want to surface those with the state broadband office would be really helpful. Next slide. There we go. So then we've talked a little bit about the initial proposal. As they are drafted, they have to submit their initial proposals in 3 different buckets. The first one is volume 1, which is basically the challenge process. So that will go up for a 30-day public comment period before it is submitted to us. Only 2 states have submitted their volume 1s to us so far. Many of them are in the public comment period stage. So we expect those to start coming in October and early November as well, as they kind of march towards that deadline. The second volume 2 is the real meat and potatoes. How are you going to run your subgrantee selection process? How are you thinking about all the different variables here for selecting providers to connect everyone to the internet? That's what's due by the end of December. Once their volume 1 is approved and they have submitted their volume 2, they can begin conducting their challenge process. So for some states, they could be running their challenge process before the end of the year. I think for most of our states, the majority of our states, will see challenge processes kicking off towards the end of the year, beginning of next year. They'll run their challenge process. They'll kind of fold all of that in as they kind of put out for bid their subgrantee selection process. They'll run that process. They'll get it back to NTIA. Here are the results of what we said we were going to do. We give them a gold star for doing what they said they were going to do. And then at that point, they're off to the races with starting actual kind of projects on the ground. which two states? Louisiana and Virginia have both submitted their volume 1. And I'll go back and check if anybody else has. It's hard to keep track as we're like, the BEAD program, y'all, I will say this is a message that we give to our states all the time, is an open book test. We want to see incredibly successful applications at the end of this year. And so to that end, we are we're providing TA in your states. I was joking earlier, I just drew this short straw and got back from Guam. So it was beautiful, by the way. So working there, we're providing active TA in your states. We're looking at their proposals ahead of time and providing feedback in real time. We're looking at them during that 30-day public comment period to see if there's anything else that we can provide. So we are a real partner with the states here and want them to be successful, and that extends to local government. So if there are questions that you all have, I'll put my contact information in the chat, and certainly you all know how to surface them through this group. But we really appreciate the opportunity to kind of chat with you all and tell you a little bit. I think I'm out of time, but if we can go to that last slide with the map on it, the Internet for All, there we go. So if you haven't already, hover over your state. It'll tell you who the contact information is for your federal program officer, who is kind of our eyes and ears on the ground. We have a FPO in every state and territory helping to serve this program, as well as the state broadband office, who you probably do already know, but that information, as well as the link we put in the chat for public comment period. So that was a lot. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, and I'm gonna listen in on the panel after this as well, and we'll be lurking for an opportunity to answer questions as well. But thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate the time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Love the open book concept, or open book test concept. And so thank you for underscoring that kind of support. So thank you again for your time, Courtney, and your insights. Since we're running out of time, and we're going to turn now to the next panel, and we're going to talk with Katheryn de Witt, who's the project director of the Broadband Access Initiative at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Katheryn's going to moderate our panel of mayors and provide some perspectives on this grant opportunity. Katheryn, great to have you with us, and the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the entire team for asking me to join today. This is a great conversation and never easy to follow Courtney, but I'll do my best. So we will jump right into the conversation. I am joined today by three very strong leaders in the digital divide, strong for different and similar reasons. Mayor Wu, Mayor Whitfield, and Ian Linssen. So we've got a great diversity of perspectives, geography. So sorry, my Pew nerd is showing. But Mayor Wu, we are going to kick it off with you. In 2020, 32,000 households in the city of Boston lacked broadband access. And you ran on a platform to ensure that every Bostonian has access to high-speed internet. Can you talk to us about how that's going and how you're collaborating with partners to get that done?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be with everyone here, and especially to be appearing alongside these fellow leaders and municipal champions. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. I also have my secret phone a friend in the room. Our CIO is in the room with me, Santiago Garces, who's leading all of this work. I will say one of the moments that sticks out most to me during the pandemic was watching my older son then transition to Zoom kindergarten. And as all of this was happening, seeing the delivery of Chromebooks and this and that and the other, and even in the days when we would get logged on and he was sitting there, you could see the class was maybe halfway present, right, in terms of the attendance. Different students would pop in from time to time. It would never be the same collection. It was never the full class. And even the students who were on, a significant number, probably a third of the class, it was hard to hear because the internet connection was so slow and so challenging. And so the impacts of this really have lived with me very personally. We have gotten that gap much smaller. We're down to a little over 14,000 households now without internet. And we feel very proud of the kind of overall rates and coverage among the one of the smallest gaps that we can point to nationwide, but we know exactly who is bearing the impacts of these gaps, right? And so our strategy in a world where often the concept of the digital divide and how we address that and the programs that are set up can tend to be much more focused on rural communities or areas where there's kind of a lack of infrastructure rather than lack of access and connection to the infrastructure. We're really trying to focus on how do we target, how do we do the outreach. We have gotten 44,000 households connected through the ACP program, and really with a laser focus on affordable residents living in affordable housing, building by building, and really thinking about it as not just a programmatic and funding conversation, but a real infrastructure conversation as we move through the city to make sure schools are connected, family members are connected, that new buildings that are climate efficient also very much have this as part of the baseline. So through efforts like our Digital Equity Fund, really partnering with community organizations who can help us reach residents and do that in new ways, a healthcare organization that signs up patients as they're waiting in the waiting room to go in, or others who are going door to door or canvassing in different events, or the own assessments that we're doing now of really digging deep into how do we pick these 3 or 4 subsidized housing developments, look at the infrastructure, identify the barriers, make a roadmap for how to project out costs and supply chains and all that into the future so we can really scale very quickly.
That you just described a very complex process in a very succinct way, and it seems very actionable. So thank you for that. We may need to just make sure that gets written down and shared with a larger group. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I want to turn really quick to Mayor Whitfield and then Ian. For those who don't know, and I work for Pew, so we really can't pick states. I say this to a survey and group of 135 people. But Ohio, I feel like, is a little bit of a sleeper state when it comes to broadband. People don't really know what's going on, but the state has a lot going on. So Mayor Whitfield, let's turn to you. Like Mayor Wu, you've also been a champion of extending broadband access while you've been in office, including a P3 that's deploying fiber internet throughout the city. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How did that P3 come together? What's working? What have you learned? What should your colleagues on the phone know about?
Yeah, so first off, thank you to the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Thank you to Bloomberg Philanthropies. And thank you to all the partners who helped pull this together. And I see I got some OH love in here, so that's always good to have some Ohio folks here. So just a little bit of background. Prior to becoming mayor, a couple of jobs ago, I worked under the BTOP program we had through the recovery plan before. So part of my job was going around in our community, training people on how to use technology. I was a part of a team of 5, and we trained about 2,000 residents on digital skills. We got them devices and got them connected to the internet. So I came into office kind of having a clear understanding of the gap that existed within our community when it comes to broadband connectivity. And I started January 2020, and we all know what happened March 2020. And it was kind of one of those moments where, we had to trust our training, where all that broadband training that I had learned and taught, it was time for it to show up in the city. And as many of you know, broadband became a life and death utility for our residents. And if you wanted to get a vaccine, you needed to register online. If you wanted to register for food, you had to do it online. And so we had to get really creative with our outreach plan. And we reached out to some ISPs and said, hey, this is a challenge and we need your support in it. And we were fortunate that Kinetic by Windstream was one of those partners that said, yep, we're on board. They gave us a nice donation. We partnered with the local Goodwill, and we stood up a broadband program where we provided training to residents to get them the skills and devices they needed to survive. And I'm so proud of how that played out, because I think at the U.S. Conference of Mayors Conference, we showed the picture, but we actually took the Goodwill thrift store and moved clothes out of the way and set up a computer lab right there. Because what we noticed, and what many of you know on this call, how we market most of our content is online. So this audience is a very unique audience we have to reach. And in the city of Elyria, and I put a little bit of demographics in the chat, we have an aging population. So we had to reach them through putting flyers and utility bills. We had to do creative things like I'm mentioning with Goodwill. We had to really, the newspaper, we had to get really creative with our outreach with our older population. But we've trained over 200 folks in the past 2 years. And this year, I think we'll have another 100 that we're training. And there's something else I want to talk about later on, just in terms of the cities who rely on income tax. Cities like mine that are post-industrial cities, this digital transformation that the country is going through is such a unique opportunity. I might not be able to get Google to move into the city of Elyria, but I might be able to get 50 residents to be able to work remotely for Google, which from a bottom line standpoint, it has the same impact in our city as moving that company here. So this remote work opportunity, we want to make sure our residents don't miss out on.
That's a great point to bring up the revenue piece. It's something we talk a lot about, and I think we could benefit from learning from mayors. We across the field could benefit from learning from mayors about how y'all are thinking about that intersection of universal access and revenue. So that is fantastic to hear you say. Ian, let's pivot a little bit to Arizona, also a sleeper state. Everybody's great. But last year, Mayor Giles shared information about the Mesa's, fascinating and very ambitious initiative to bring high-speed internet access to the entire city, including allowing multiple providers to connect to the fiber. And I will admit, I went down like a little bit of a rabbit hole reading about the regulatory changes y'all made. A lot of folks talk about competition and assume that as a natural outcome of public investment. But y'all have actually looked at the policy variables and created an environment to really make that happen. So can you talk to us a little bit more about what regulatory and policy changes you made to facilitate this?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question. And first of all, thanks again for the opportunity to participate here. We really appreciate it. And Mayor Giles says hello. He did want to be here, but unfortunately was unable to. So he sent me pitch hitter. But I think one of the reasons that we were so successful in this initiative is the fact that our mayor and our council said at the forefront, hey, this is a priority for our community. We want to get extra connectivity options in our city. It's very expensive if we were to do it ourselves. So what are the other options? Well, it's the market. And this was before all the federal funding was available, right? And they wanted it now. They wanted to take action on their own and get something in the city that could work for our residents in the very short term. So what they did is very openly said, hey, we are interested in taking a look at our current approach to how we facilitate communication providers, fiber optic internet providers in Mesa. And we outlined what we kind of call our fiber optic toolkit that contains, now this was it took a period of months here to figure all of this out, but ultimately what it did contain was a series of regulatory reforms that I think were really the linchpin in allowing these providers to come into town. So quickly, the biggest one in my mind was actually one of the construction methodologies that we allowed. So in Arizona previously, we didn't have a lot of experience with micro trenching. So traditionally, when you do these networks, you're boring 3 feet underground. It can be relatively invasive. You're going into public utility easements, which extend into people's yards. Well, micro trenching stays back of curb in the asphalt. It's a 2-inch wide trench that can go anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches deep. I've seen it in action. You can go through a whole neighborhood block from start to finish in a day. And this was a big deal to allow this type of methodology because we had to get over some hurdles around, well, will this hold up in the Arizona heat? What's going to happen when we have to reconstruct our roads? What happens if another utility provider cuts one of these lines? Well, we were able to work all of that out. And I can go into an hour-long talk on what we had to do there, but ultimately we became comfortable with this construction methodology, and it has allowed these providers to move very, very fast. The second thing that I say we took a look at was how we recouped our costs for maintenance of the right-of-way. So traditionally, we did a per linear foot fee. for providers who are in our rights of way. That, if you expanded that out to these citywide builds, which we wanted to have happen. So Mesa is about 150 square miles. We have roughly 2,500 linear feet of streets. If you expanded out that fee, it would be anywhere between $22 to $25 million a year per provider. That was just impossible for these providers to take on. I don't know what's happening with my plug here, so I'm sorry. And so what we had to do was restructure in a way that compensation so that it still worked for the city. So we still were able to recover our costs, but it was more manageable for the provider. So what we did is we looked at some traditional ways, some traditional fees for video providers and that sort of thing, and essentially took a percentage of these network providers' revenue, which ended up being less than the per linear foot fee, but still recovered all of our costs. We did all the financials behind it, and we were very satisfied. So we were able to do that. The third thing, and this I think is a really big deal for anybody who's looking to get additional broadband in our city, is we had to look at what was the regulatory workforce on our side. Did we have the capacity to handle these builds? We have providers that want to do hundreds of thousands of feet a month. And right now we have 3 providers doing that type of work. So it's an insane volume. So we had to take a look at, first of all, let's be ready to get additional staff there. But what we did is in the licenses, we put a provision whereby these providers could actually pay for contract staff that are contracted out through the city of Mesa that are dedicated to those builds. So that was a provision right in that license. We had done some of that before, but never really codified it in this way. And so that has allowed us already to bring on roughly six or seven contract staff just today. That's going to go up by 10x within the next year or so, all enabled through this kind of reimbursement process. So there's a lot there. Those are our big 3. When we package that all together, these providers are like, yes, when can we start? When can we ramp up? And so we really think those were some of the driving factors behind the success that we've been seeing over the past year.
That is incredibly interesting, and I appreciate you bringing up the point about the regulatory workforce to process all of this. This is something I've been discussing actually with several states, and can they build something in? How do they bring that support to local government? So this is a great example. So I appreciate that, and we all know it's going to be a challenge. I think what I've heard from all of you in different ways is part of the success of your projects, your initiatives, has really been about knowing the gaps that your communities are facing, knowing the challenges that you may have or the barriers that may stand in the way to achieving that goal, whether it's trenching and revenue, or whether it's about kind of knowing who the appropriate folks are. So Courtney discussed at length the importance of the challenge process. And so any thoughts on how, what do y'all need to know in order to kind of fill those information gaps when it comes to states actually running their challenge process? In other words, you've already identified what the gaps are in your communities, but what else do you need to know from states in order to be successful challengers when it comes to BEAD?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in real quick. So fortunately for us, the process that our governor's office here in Arizona is undertaking is very transparent. It's very inclusive. They have asked specifically for local participation. And so they've kind of outlined how they've looked at our areas. They obviously they take a look at the FCC map first and foremost, but then they actually go out and they've been talking to ISP providers. They've been talking to nonprofits to see what it actually looks like on the ground. They were actually able to do, and I'm not sure if I know the specific name here, like a pre-challenge process. It's why they were so successful in getting funding. They challenged a huge number of locations and said, no, this is not true. We don't have access here. And so Arizona was able to get nearly $1 billion in funding because it was several $100 million more than we originally were going to get. So without getting too specific, that's what they did. They talked to providers, they talked to folks working on the ground. They reached out to localities to say, what were we seeing? So I would just I guess, say if there's any advice to give here is kind of like the previous speaker was mentioning, reach out to your state agency that's working on this to ask them to do those things, to talk to your mayors, to talk to those folks in City Hall that know what's happening in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would say the same thing in Ohio. We have a very engaged governor's office on this broadband, as you mentioned, kind of a sleeper state, but I think that this has been one of those issues that has shown sort of that bipartisan importance, and it hasn't mattered what side of the aisle you're on. They've really put in the effort to engage community, get feedback. I think they've done some early challenges as well. So I think, state of Ohio, I'm really proud of how they've gone about it.
I would just add that because our focus is really not even to narrow the gap, but to close it, which requires understanding kind of household by household what the situation is. Having more granularity around the data to be able to find those households would be tremendously helpful. Right now, we are doing our own looking into the American Community Survey to pull those numbers. We know who has signed up for ACP and other kinds of programs, but we're not quite sure the exact overlap or intersection of those. And we generally have an understanding of how big the universe is of families and households we're trying to reach, but we don't know exactly where they are and which within each building, sort of what floor do they live on. And then even zooming in more specifically, let's say they have internet, right? So they may not even be within that number, but we don't count it as being the digital divide being closed unless the kind of major tenets of affordability, quality, and choice are also there. And so we want to make sure they can, have it because they can pay for it and it fits into the household budget. And there's various programs we try to sign people up for and supports there. But we also need to have the standards be at a certain connectivity speed and level. And we're even going, again, building by building to set wiring standards and where every square foot counts for different space and how that turns into residential area or others, having that set aside so that not only will the initial wiring be possible with network closets and all that, but that the ongoing maintenance is going to be built in as something that is convenient and feasible. And then on the choice side, my team shares with me that even when a building might be technically wired for or connected to service, that it might have an exclusive under one particular internet service provider, and we want every resident to have the full benefits of market options and to be able to allow for multiple choices to come in so that, though, again, we think if we can solve this for our residents living in subsidized housing and affordable housing, we feel confident that we're solving it for everyone in the community. And so really getting into how do we ensure that, again, in those locations, everyone has the full range of options and quality.
So it sounds like across the board, y'all are not necessarily thinking of this as sort of the traditional way the field has, which is that binary question of, is it available or is it not? That is the lowest of the low floor that you are starting from. It really is thinking forward about affordability, devices, the quality of the connection, and in some cases, actual choice and competition as well.
Think about the kindergartners, right? If you might be in the Zoom, but if you can't hear anything the teacher is saying, what's the point?
Right.
And
Mayor Whitfield?
To echo that, I think the same thing goes with affordability as Mayor Wu was sharing around quality. If you can't afford it, it's not accessible. And, that's why the ACP program is so important, that we continue to spread the word. And, we've tried to do a lot of outreach with the FCC around making sure people are signing up for that program because, for so many homes that additional bill every month to be able to provide high speed quality internet access, they're sacrificing a whole nother part of their lives to be able to maintain that. And so we have to make sure we do what we can to make sure it remains affordable.
Mm-hmm. I think that point that you just made about, where these subsidies can really, they do make a difference in folks' monthly budgets. I think that's lost on some people sometimes who aren't living paycheck to paycheck or aren't on a fixed income, and that $30 a month or 75, it really does make a difference. And that's something I think we need to keep reminding lawmakers. Ian, I am curious if y'all have seen any effect on pricing for your residents as a result of the plan that you've implemented?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the most exciting things. I just gave an update to our council on this the other day. So a couple of anecdotal stories, but other things. First of all, so prior to this whole initiative, the top speeds you would see in Mesa were around the 1 gigabit, and you're paying roughly $110 a month for that. That's the top tier, top of the line price. Today, and it's slowly rolling out, residents have access to 8 gigabits. Now that's still the top price. It's still like $200 a month for that. But the 1 gigabit service is now in the $60 range. And then what's happening with our existing legacy providers, I'm actually one of them in Mesa, my bill has gone down nearly 50%. And I don't even have a new fiber provider in front of me yet. And that's happening across the city. So that extra choice that our council, our mayor was looking for has already brought in the benefits. We expect that to continue. We have an open access provider that's actually working in Mesa as well. Already seeing the 3 or 4 ISPs that are on there competing with each other has been amazing. And so we expect now, I mean, this is what we had hoped for, is that we would get some increased choice, increased competition. We're already seeing it before the city. I mean, we've just started. We've had roughly 30,000 residential homes passed, and the affordability is already coming down. On the point of the subsidy, though, all of the providers are they're all part of the ACP. One of our providers is going to be offering a gig product at $30 a month for ACP eligibility. I mean, it's amazing. So competition works. Let me put it that way.
Okay. That's great to hear about the provider shifting from their low-cost plan to a gig for $30 a month. That's fantastic. I do, as much as I would love to keep pelting y'all with questions, I know that there are questions in the audience, so happy to open it up for Q&A. And I think the first one is coming in from Louis Tobias.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think that first of all, thank you for all the information that you have provided this afternoon. One of the questions I have was I'm envious of both Arizona and Ohio because I believe there's some geographic differences in the cooperation level with the ISPs and the municipalities. And the gentleman from Mesa said that their providers were complaining because they were going to cost them $22 million a year. Here in Rochester, we actually got sued from a provider that didn't want to pay $60,000 a year. So I'm trying to figure out if you have any essential advice for us, or if there's any kind of movement toward declaring broadband a public utility similar to electricity and water and natural gas, such that the regulations could be uniform. Because in Mesa, I'm sure the ISPs are looking at their return on investment because of the size and the economics of the city. I live in a city that has extreme poverty, is aging, Rust Belt, and may not be as attractive. So I was wondering if you guys could comment on that.
I'm happy to jump in, because one of the first things we looked at in Mesa that the mayor asked us to research was, could we take this on by ourselves and kind of go along down that path of a public utility? Because our mayor absolutely believes this is as essential, well, obviously not life critical, but very, very much essential to everything we do day in and day out. So we took a look at that. The problem was, it's just from a pure cost standpoint, it would have been the largest capital expenditure we had ever undertaken as a city. And we had just done nearly a $500 million wastewater treatment plant that we had just bonded for. This would have surpassed that. On top of that, if we were to run it ourselves, we had we've got some really smart people here, but we did not have the technical capacity to run an ISP. And so we needed to, would have had to stand that up. It did just so happen that the market environment here in Mesa, in the Phoenix area, is very good. And so we didn't think about, would we kind of do some sort of regulatory scheme that would, turn this into a public entity? Our council, our mayor said, let's take a look at the market first and see what it could do. But I do think in some other areas, that's something to think about, although I am aware of a lot of other lawsuits around that type of action as well.
Mayor Wu, Mayor Whitfield, anything to add there?
Go for it, Mayor.
I'll just echo a lot of what has been said. I think, again, in a perfect world, absolutely, this is critical infrastructure that should be treated with as few barriers as possible. And really the only way to do that, fully focused on the public interest, is through the public sector. But at the city level, we are putting our money to a lot of different things. And in Boston, we are also lucky that we have anywhere north of 7 ISPs competing in different parts of the city. And so it's really been about how do we leverage what is already happening, kind of incentivize and push some of those partners to upgrade and work with us and be really targeted about where additional investments need to be made. But we have started to increase the grant funding that's available and how we are using that to provide a little bit of to either fill in the gaps or provide additional incentive where possible.
And I was just gonna say, we also try to just foster that sense of competition. I mentioned earlier on when the pandemic first hit, we reached out to both ISPs in our community and said, hey, this is a problem. And then we celebrated the one that took the opportunity, and we kind of shamed the one that didn't. And so we want to foster that sense of, hey, here's a good community partner who cares. And they are the ones that made the additional infrastructure investment. They've been the ones that have been partners, and it's forced the others to kind of step up and also reduce cost and reduce the burden for residents. So anything that you can do, from using this bully pulpit, and the mayor of Rochester, you said Rochester, the mayor of Rochester, he knows about Elyria. Tell him, give me a call. I'll talk to him about it.
All right, Louis, did you hear that? Give Mayor Whitfield a call and see if we can get a little Ohio and New York love happening. I assume you mean Rochester, New York. Yes. Okay, great. Okay, super. What I would add before, I know there's one more question from Mayor Hovland from Edina, Minnesota. The best piece of advice that no one asked for from me, policy is on your side when it comes to BEAD implementation and the requirements that have been written into statute. NTIA has subsequently reinforced those requirements through all of its funding rules. So that concept, while it may not be a public utility, it is being treated in that way, that things must be at a certain speed, at a certain level. They must be affordable, but more importantly, they have to be available to everyone. So there's I hate to use this word because it's been used negative, or the strategy is being used negatively for so many years, but think about how to gamify and use that policy to your advantage so you can get as close to that utility as possible, get as much matching funds on the table, think about those capital costs and OpEx in order to get to that public utility concept, if not the actual outcome. Okay, Mayor Hovland, I will let you ask your final question.
Great, thank you, Katheryn. This is more practical than policy driven in terms of the question, but for Ian, I was wondering, with respect to the competitors that you've got in the right of way using this micro trenching technique, how do you coordinate them working in the right of way at the same time? Do you make them all occupy the same space? Do they use the same pipe or cable or whatever it is for the broadband transmission? How does all that work from a practical standpoint?
That's a really great question. It's something we thought about for a very, very long time. So long story short, in the license itself, we say we encourage providers to coordinate with each other to use the same facilities. But at the end of the day, we're not requiring it. We are relatively fortunate that for the vast majority of our city, our right of way is not super crowded. However, I mean, we've got 10, 20 square miles at least that are very, very crowded. So we have to be extra careful there. But we anticipated up to 3 separate providers doing micro trenching within our rights of way. And we kind of set because the other thing that we did is we created the first ever set of micro trenching standards in Arizona that others can use. I'm happy to share. But with those standards, we were comfortable that we could get 3 next to each other without causing a significant concern. The other thing I can tell you, though, in talking with all these providers, they're very hesitant unless they're required to share facilities. They all want their own networks. Now, again, you can have an open access provider that's just laying the pipe and the fiber and getting the tenants on, but otherwise, they want control over their own resources. So it's something we'll be watching, especially in those very congested areas. If it gets to a point where it becomes a problem in those areas, our council, our mayor has said they're open to revisiting that to require that sharing. I know, for example, in New York City, they happen to do that. Where it is very, very congested, but for us, for the time being, things are okay with their separate facilities.
Good, thank you for that. I think if you could provide us or provide Jamie with those micro trenching standards, that would be really beneficial to all of us.
Would be very happy to.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Katheryn.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, mayors. Thank you, Katheryn. This has been a wonderful discussion. I really want to thank you all for everything you've brought to this group in terms of this program and your thinking on this. We're about to end our session, so I just wanted to quickly give everyone a moment to participate in the Zoom poll. And then also to give you a whole lot of information about some upcoming opportunities and things that we're resources and information we want to share with you. So first of all, I want to remind you of this opportunity for cities with a population of 150,000 or less. The registration is now open for our Digital Equity Act competitive grant program boot camp. These participants, if you take part in this, will have access to subject matter experts, office hours, coaching sessions, peer-to-peer learning, a whole spectrum of support to help strengthen applications. And so visit the link in the chat to learn more. But to check and check up your city's eligibility and to register, but it's a really exciting opportunity for cities that are 150,000 in population or less. Second, we've posted both of 5 winning strategies for BEAD grant applications and a table that maps out broadband funding streams in the resources library section of our website, the LIH website, for your reference. The links should be in the chat now, but that's another really important piece of content. Third, I wanted to point out that the Local Infrastructure Hub has partnered with Accelerator for America to identify and bring to life stories of high-impact infrastructure projects happening across all of these funding programs to help inspire your work. They've developed 2 case studies on broadband projects that we're going to be circulating through the hub. Ross Van Doggen, the Director of Infrastructure and Intergovernmental Affairs of Accelerator America, is approaching and sharing these case studies. And so would love to have you say 2 words, Ross, if you're still on.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Michelle. I know we're right at the very tail end of today's session, so I'll keep this very brief. But Accelerator for America is honored to play a very small role within the Local Infrastructure Hub through partnership with Results for America and Bloomberg to highlight these transformational infrastructure projects happening across the country that are either funded by or eligible under legislation such as the IIJA and the IRA. In fact, one of the first case studies that we're going to be making available to everyone here and across the Local Infrastructure Hub network is in Mesa, Arizona, the project that Ian was talking about today. So if you want to continue, Katheryn, down the rabbit hole, we're going to be thrilled to share that case study with you all, so you can take away these pieces of advice from Mesa, Arizona, and also from Waterloo's newly minted municipally owned fiber network as well. So we're going to be releasing a series of these over the next few months, and very, very excited to lift up several transformational infrastructure projects during that time period. So thanks very much, Michelle, for acknowledging us.
Thank you, Ross. Really important stuff. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., we're going to be hosting a Tech and Innovation Center session that focuses on current and future funding opportunities from the U.S. Department of Energy. This is designed to help cities update their building codes. And then finally, on Tuesday, October 10th at 2 p.m., we're going to hold our next big grant opportunity session. This is going to be focused on opportunities to invest in resilient infrastructure in the face of climate change and the extreme weather events we've been seeing. So be sure to check out our calendar and the resources on our website. There's a whole lot going on and a lot of great information there. But thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.